Hello, everybody. I'm Suzanne McAllister with the Post Animal Use World Project, or PAW Project, and today I am really happy to be meeting myself for the first time, Mary Ryan, who is with Forgotten Cats, and she's going to tell us about Forgotten Cats. And I became aware of Mary through two good friends, Joel and Likia. Joel volunteers with Forgotten Cats. And I didn't mention this to you, Mary, as we were getting to know each other in the few minutes before we started recording. But I volunteered with Forgotten Cats, I'm going to say 10, 12 years ago at the PetSmart in
Ah,
Jenkintown.
that's wonderful.
And my cat, Priscilla, is a failed foster from,
Yes, we have many of those.
yes. Well, interesting story about Priscilla. I went and got her and a cat named Jade. This is going back 12 or 13 years ago. They were up at the facility where I think you spend a lot of your time, where the spaying and neutering happens. And they were in an upstairs room, and I was
Okay.
told they'd
Mhm.
been there for a while. So
Yes.
I thought, I'm going to get them. Went and got them, took them to an adoption event after a day or two. Jade was scooped up immediately. Priscilla was at the back of her cage, not exactly friendly. Anyway, long story short, friends of mine adopted her and then they returned her after a couple of months. She and their cat just did not get along. And I realized she was not going to show well at adoption events. So here we are 12, 13 years later, and she and I are a team.
She's
So
a wonderful cat, I'm sure.
she is.
Happens so many times.
She's called she's called the diva for good
Yes.
reasons. But anyway, I love her and I'm grateful.
Oh, wonderful.
So I have a nice connection with Forgotten Cats. First of all, your vision, and everybody who's a featured visionary, which Mary is our April visionary, featured visionary for Post Animal Use World, and our visionaries submit visions, and Mary's is just beautiful, and that will be published on the website generally around the time that people are seeing this interview. So keep your eye out for it. Before we talk about Forgotten Cats, I wondered if you wanted to tell us a little bit about your journey. I know from Joel and Lahia that you are vegan, and so I always find it interesting to hear how people ended up becoming vegan. If you want to share, whatever you'd like to share.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm so honored to be among the very distinguished visionaries that you have in your archives already. And I'm grateful to Joel and Likia for recommending me for this. Joel is a wonderful volunteer, and when he told me about this, I said, "Yes, I'm in."
Yeah,
So,
good.
um, well, I guess my journey really started in my childhood, in that I was very fortunate to grow up on a farm that has had potatoes and crops as well as animals. And so um, the animals on the farm were my friends.
Mhm.
And the cows, the pigs, the chickens were not quite as friendly, but in general, they were all my friends. I was very close to them, and they were companions. And so I had that experience early on of understanding the subjectivity of animals, the emotional depth, the loyalty, the sweetness
Mm.
of animals, of a mother and calf, and a pig and her babies.
Mm.
In fact, we used to uh, carry the pigs around in little carriages sometimes. You know, they were like our babies. So I was very fortunate to have had that experience, which I think many people have not had because they don't really come face to face with their meat and really understand what it is. You know, it's an object, it's something that's wrapped up in cellophane in the grocery store. And so they don't have that personal connection. So that's where I think it began for me, was understanding really what animal life was all about. And my father was a very kind, gentle person, and he instructed me that everything in nature had a purpose. And I would say, well, even those mosquitoes, Dad? And he would say, well, we don't always understand the purpose, but they
Wow.
have one. Now, he was not a religious man, to my mother's dismay, but he had that, intuition and spirituality about nature and about animals. Um, and so I think it was very difficult for him in a lot of ways because it was a farm and there was slaughter of animals. Not that I directly witnessed, but I became quite aware of that at an early age. When my best friends would disappear one day and come back wrapped up for the freezer, and
Hmm.
I would for several weeks say, "Oh, I'm not going to eat that meat. I don't want to eat that because that was my friend, and I don't like that." But in the 1950s and 60s, growing up on a farm, there weren't a lot of alternatives or other visions. So eventually, I did start eating the meat again. Um,
I'm just curious, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
What were your parents' reactions when you would say, I don't want to eat that meat?
Well, I think they were sort of gentle about it and said, "Yeah, we understand, but
Hmm.
this is just how it is."
Yeah.
Now, I never recall them saying that that's the purpose of an animal was to be meat for us, or
Yeah.
that we had, they were farmers, they were not terribly educated, but they were kind. We had dogs, we had animals, and there was always a lot of emotional connection to all of the animals. And so I know that that was not an easy thing for them either, but that was kind of how it was.
Well, that's lovely, though. It sounds like they were empathic, but then just said, but this is the way it is, which is the way it was for them.
It is the way it was
But
for them.
they didn't sort of slap you down and say, oh, come on, Mary.
No, and there were always a lot of other things to eat. We had gardens and potatoes and vegetables and things. So um, there were other things that I could eat as well. Always pickles, lots of pickles. But um, so that was like my early childhood, and it was painful for me in my teenage years, and that we lost the farm because it's
Hmm.
very hard for small farmers to survive against the industry and the mega farms and everything. We still maintain the barn and the homestead, thankfully. But I guess the next part of my journey was really when I went to college and studied philosophy. And at that point, I was not a vegetarian, but I was keenly aware of argument in philosophy and ethics and epistemology. And I, I really lacked confidence tremendously when I first started college. In fact, I finished high school in an adult ed program, and I never really thought I was going to go to college. But I ended up in college, and someone had said to me, "Oh, you should study psychology. I can see you'd really like psychology." I took one course in psychology, and I said, "This is not for me." And I had taken a course in philosophy. I said, "No, that's for me." So
Wow.
I was even afraid to speak in my first classes. I was so shy, and I would make a goal for myself to say at least two things in every class. So I started doing that until I eventually gained my confidence. And, within a few months, I was arguing in philosophy class about, this is moral and this is not ethical. And I started talking, as philosophy majors and others are, I began reading quite avidly about animal rights and so on. And I started arguing about animals. And someone in the class turned to me and said, "Are you a vegetarian?" And I thought for a moment, and I said, "Yes, I am." And from that moment, I was.
I
I
love
wasn't
it.
going to lose the argument for that point, but I did.
Well, I'm just curious, what was that moment like for you?
It was like being stabbed in the heart, and it's like, I've been violating my principles. This is contradiction, and I understand that we can't have this kind of contradiction in of logic in philosophy and in our lives. And I think that's always a hard part for all of us, is thinking about there are contradictions on a daily basis that we face about the kind of life that we want to live, non-injury to other living things. How do I live in the way that um, that is true to my values. But I knew that eating meat was not something that I could not give up. And so, yeah, I said, no, no, yes, I'm a vegetarian, of
And
course,
you were from that moment
from
on.
that moment on. And
Okay.
so the vegetarianism lasted for quite a long time until I began to um, uh, join multiple organizations and get scads of things in the mail. In those days, there was not as much on the internet, but you would get like a lot of literature from all these groups.
Hmm.
And so I would see the photographs of the factory farms, the slaughterhouses. I would read about the cows. And of course, the cows were so close to me on the farm. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're taking these babies from their moms. They're being bred just for milk. This is so cruel. The veal crates. The eggs in the factory farms, and I said, no, I have to go. I have to go the full way. Um, and fortunately, I like cooking, and because I also learned how to cook in 4-H in the country and from my mother, and so it became the next step for me to learn about vegetarian cooking. I think Laurel's Kitchen was my first cookbook, and then I started reading about the farm in Tennessee, which was a co-op, and a lot of soy and so on. And so that became the next project for me, was learning how to substitute. And I always recommend to people who say, "Oh, I'd like to be a vegetarian," or "That sounds good. What do but giving up meat seems so hard, or giving up the things that I like." And I always say it's not about giving up as much as it is about substituting other things and
That's a great
starting
way
to
of
like,
putting it. Yeah.
yeah, like learn to substitute the good things, the healthy things, the vegan, plant-based. And I think plant-based has a ring to it that that vegetarian and vegan, although vegan's becoming more popular, right? I do see that a lot. But I think that like just the idea of a plant-based sounds ecologically healthy. So
Well,
that's
I
what I
think
encourage people to do.
I think, unfortunately, the word vegan, and I've had this conversation with so many people, what to use, vegan or plant-based. And plant-based is innocuous, and like you said, has these other benefits to it. And vegan can sometimes be off-putting to people, and yet vegan really is the whole lifestyle,
Yes,
which I'm
yes,
sure
yes,
you're aware of. But
yes.
anyway, that's a really interesting journey from start to finish, both, you talking about your father and his kindness and how they were really very kind to you when you said, I don't want to eat this. And, they sort of let you do that until you came around to saying, okay, I guess I'm going to eat this because that's what's being offered and that's what we do. Yeah.
I think the other part of my journey has been being a teacher. And from the time I was young, I wanted to be a teacher. I had a bird club and a horse club, and I used to have my friends sit around and they'd have to, keep notes about things. And so um, after I got my degree in philosophy, and I thought, well, what am I going to do with that? Um, I ended up going into education. I thought I would do philosophy of education, um, which I did for a while. And then I studied philosophy for children, which was
Mm.
a very interesting approach to critical thinking. And so I was a teacher for 30 years. And in that time, I was able to introduce children to a lot of these ideas. I mean, one has to be very careful not to indoctrinate, but to expose children to. I used to cook for them. We had, we made uh, uh, tofu dogs and tofurkey, and we did things. We cooked chili. We made smoothies. I had a club. Um, sometimes I would combine it with health and nutrition classes. Sometimes we would do after school things. So teaching them about it also helped me, because teaching is the best way to learn something.
Hmm.
And so, that has been like an inspiration for me to be able to pass on some of this and to see how readily children grasp these ideas as if it's something that they were in many times looking for. It was like a perfect fit. Um, it didn't always click when they went home because they didn't it wasn't always supported at home, but at least they had ideas. And one never knows the influence that you have as a teacher. I mean, I have children come back to me 10, 15 years later and say how something influenced them that we did together or that we talked about. So, one hopes that we do have an influence on the next generation to embrace this lifestyle and this cause.
I have two thoughts. One, if you're willing, I'd like to do another conversation at some point, really looking at the philosophy of education with children and your experience there. I find that really, really interesting, but I want to make sure we have time for you to talk about Forgotten Cats. The other thing that struck me when you were just saying we never know what impact we have. And I wonder if the person who asked you, are you vegetarian, knows the impact that he or she had on you.
Right. That's true.
So, but anyway, let's fast forward. Tell me about your connection. Well, first tell us about Forgotten Cats. I'm familiar with them, but people listening to this may not be. So maybe you can say a bit about Forgotten Cats, your role there, and so on.
Well, I became involved with Forgotten Cats about 17 or 18 years ago. Um, Again, it was through a student who was volunteering at an adoption center and at Jenkintown PetSmart. And I said, well, isn't that amazing that you're doing that? And
Hmm.
I thought, I should do that as well. And so I started volunteering there. And as a teacher, I had summers off and I learned about this place called The Clinic in Willow Grove. And so I started volunteering there and I spent the summer um, helping in the clinic with recovery of cats after surgery, and then I became more and more involved. So I think Forgotten Cats is not really well known outside of the people who bring cats to us for spaying and neutering. We do a lot of large colony work. We have people that come from Berks County and from New Jersey and from far, places like an hour or so away and bring, sometimes 10 or 15 or 20 cats a week to be
Wow.
spayed or neutered. Sometimes they are bringing them, they have like services for people who, pet owners who don't have the ability to get spaying and neutering at a private vet. And sometimes they are trappers for just doing big colonies,
Mhm.
colonies of cats to reduce the tragic overpopulation problem of cats and kittens. And everyone is a volunteer. I mean, everyone at Forgotten Cats, except the veterinarians, are volunteers. And it is so amazing to see the dedication, the hard work, what people do to save these cats, to give them a better life, and and to see them be adopted out, which is the most wonderful thing. But uh, people can go on our website, forgottencats.org, and request an appointment for surgery, a package that will include spaying and neutering, all the shots, all the vaccinations, deworming, and everything at a fraction of what it would cost at a private vet.
Wow.
Um,
And I think I read in the materials you sent me that, is it over 200,000, did you say?
it's amazing.
Cats
It's
that have been spayed
amazing.
and neutered, which
Mhm,
is
mhm.
extraordinary.
I mean, we just at Willow Grove, we are doing like almost 250 a week sometimes. We have a clinic 4 days a week,
Hmm.
and there's
And for people who are not familiar, I live in Jenkintown and Mary. I'm not sure where you are.
I'm in Glenside.
In Glenside. So we're in southeastern Pennsylvania. So Forgotten Cats is an organization based in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I guess the catchment area is around southeast Pennsylvania. But like
Yeah,
you said, people come from an hour away to avail themselves of these services, which is really wonderful.
Yes, and we have another clinic in Trainer, which is closer to the Delaware border near Westchester. And we've most recently opened one in Seaford, Delaware, which is closer to Maryland because we have people that are driving up from Maryland to our clinics. And so there just are not these resources available. So it
And
really,
how does the funding work for Forgotten
well,
Cats?
well, people do pay for the packages, so it's not like free, but there are vouchers available which have been made available for some by some nonprofit groups. There are vouchers for people who are not able to pay, not for a vast number of cats, but for maybe one or two cats. There are some grants from different agencies, perhaps the Department of Agriculture, PetSmart, Petco. We're always in the process of applying for grants to do that, and from donations as well. There are fundraisers to support
And,
it.
and you said that you didn't think Forgotten Cats was as well known. And I'm curious about that. Is that intentional, or has it just not been the focus to try to get the word out that there is this pretty amazing service?
Well, if you Google low-cost spay neuter services in Pennsylvania or Montgomery County, it will come up.
Okay.
If you call the SPCA and say, hey, where can I get spaying and neutering? They probably have a few very limited appointments. The SPCAs do some. ACT in Philadelphia will do some. They may refer people to Forgotten Cats, but we really don't have the capacity to expand a lot more beyond what we have because I mean you have the vets and then you have the volunteer staff. And I can't say enough about our veterinarians that do sometimes up to 70 surgeries a day. And when I talk to my own vet, they are in amaze. Like it would take me a while to even remember how to do one surgery, because they specialize. But
Yes.
we do like the spaying and neutering, and it's a lot of labor. They're on their feet, they're moving.
Yeah.
It's very hard physically. Um, and hard emotionally too, because a lot of times the cats that come in to us, um, there are a lot of stray cats. There are a lot of stray and homeless cats and feral cats, and they have significant injuries,
Yeah.
lacerations. Many times that we have to do amputations,
Oh,
tails and legs and sometimes eye surgeries. But we do amazing, and we recuperate them
yeah.
so that they can either be adopted or return to a caregiver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question, but before we go to that, well, actually, it's connected to my question. I used to volunteer, I guess it was the SPCA on Erie Avenue, or
Mhm.
for just this thing where they had a clinic and people would bring their cats in. So I'm very familiar with that. They come in, they're in their cages and they're covered because they're feral and they're terrified.
Yes.
And then watching them as they wake up and getting them back into their carriers. I was always interested, and this is my question. They would often have a table with food out for the volunteers. It was anything but vegan.
I'm sure.
And I'm just curious what you would say the percentage of people who volunteer at Forgotten Cats are vegan and those who are not, and whether it's even something that comes up or you know about.
Well, I will say the percentage is quite low,
Okay.
quite low. There are a couple of us. Um, again, it's part of the contradiction that we have in society, right? That we love our cats and dogs, but we eat we eat
Well,
things that have
Melanie
good.
Joy's book, right? Why
Yes,
We
yes,
Love, yeah, yeah,
yes. I mean,
yeah,
I try to leave literature out, and I leave books out and things. There's a lot I think sometimes in just exposing people, but um, again, that's where I think children are really the youth is really the way to go, because some people are so ingrained in their lifestyles, or oh, my husband wouldn't eat that way,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So
I like that idea, and I really do want to pick your brain,
mhm,
perhaps in a follow-up to this, where we
certainly.
really focus on children, what you learned, how you did what you did when you were teaching, what were some of the difficulties, and really talking about how we can best approach children. I don't have that much contact with them, but I agree with you. They get it really quickly, and how we bridge that gap between what they may want to do and what their parents don't want them to do. A little bit like what you experienced. You
Mhm,
didn't want to eat meat. And your parents kind of said, well, this is what we do in a
mhm.
very kind way, but that's what they said.
Okay.
Um, so before we end, I wanted to ask you if people were interested in, or um, if there's a way for people who are listening this to help Forgotten Cats, what would you say?
Well, if you want to go on to our website, forgottencats.org, there is an application to volunteer. You can also go on Volunteer Match and look for us. We always need volunteers every day of the week to help with feeding, cleaning, helping in our clinics. If people have time over the summer, they might be able to do more extended work. But I would also say, just as we're talking about education for people becoming vegan, educating our neighbors and our friends about spaying and neutering is just so, so important.
Uh,
People are unaware of the problem of, everybody hears about pet overpopulation and the shelters and euthanasia at the shelters and that kind of thing. But the best way that we can prevent this kind of suffering is through spaying and neutering.
mhm.
And I get that people don't have $700 or $800 to take a cat to a vet and spay a cat, but there are services available
Mhm.
to prevent the tragedy of these unwanted cats and kittens that are born outside. I read they have like a 75% mortality rate.
Mhm.
So it's difficult for us to think about, like when you mentioned going into to the SPCA and seeing the terrified ferals being covered over, and
Yeah,
that's hard for all of us to see that. But the reality is, their life will be better.
absolutely.
Their life will be better if they have to be returned outside. We hope that there's food and shelter, and we try to arrange for that to happen when
Right,
people do bring their
right.
cats in. But we know that then they can live a life that they're not having this cycle of reproduction.
Exactly. No,
Yes,
there's no question that spaying and neutering is what an incredible service that
yes. Until we
Forgotten
get
Cats.
birth control for cats, right? Right, that's the thing.
Oh, well, Mary, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me and letting us know both about your journey and about Forgotten Cats. I learned, even though I knew about them, more about them listening to you. And I look forward to our follow-up where we're going
Thank
to
you,
focus
Suzanne.
on education and children,
Thank
which,
you for taking the time with me. It was really a pleasure to speak with you.
oh,
And
me
I'm so
too.
impressed with their organization and everything that you are doing to bring together people from different communities and different organizations, and seeing how we're all connected in this
We're
vision and
all
this
going
mission.
in the same direction, but yes, my goal is to be sort of a networker and
Yes,
introduce people to organizations they may not know about. So
wonderful, wonderful.
Cats is now going to be well featured.
Thank you,
So,
thank you so much.
oh, thank
Everything,
you.
Suzanne.